Couple of things. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Helms. I'm with New Readers Press. Thank you for joining us today. Anytime you're getting people together for the first time on Zoom, there might be a technical glitch, and we've had one today. Fortunately, we all have some level of digital literacy here, so we can solve these problems. Thank you for joining us for this digital equity and inclusion discussion. It's a three-part webinar conversation, and today, Gwenn Weaver is going to talk about why providers of adult basic education need to understand and embrace digital equity and inclusion. We're running a little bit late, so I'm just going to assume that you read the bios of our presenters when you registered, but just know that Gwenn has an extensive amount of experience in digital equity, digital literacy, and Angela is here. She's helping as well, and you saw her bio, and she's got a lot of experience in both of these areas as well. So Gwenn, I'll go ahead and stop talking. It's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dan. I'm just renaming myself on the screen here. There we go. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I guess it's morning for some of you, depending on where you are. But happy to be here. And I just want to say that, and Angela, you can go ahead and change to the next slide. What we're going to talk about today, go ahead, next slide. There you go. Thank you. This series is going to introduce you to a variety of ways to think about the intersection of technology with adult literacy and learning and the concept of digital equity. Because we all know digital technology has become the driving force for so many of different aspects of life. And as a consequence, adult learners really these days, and we all know this, need more than just basic skills and just basic conventional computer skills to engage with life in the 21st century. And digital equity, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term, but it's the concept that allows people to embrace the digital world to the fullest these days. So, Angela, go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to start by talking about the digital divide. And again, it's a term that many of you may have heard, some of you may not have heard, but recently, the World Wide Web, as we know it now, celebrated its 25th birthday, though the system that underlies it, that we call the internet, has been around a lot longer. The digital divide was identified probably back around 1994. The phrase was coined, and it was introduced to the public through a report published by the federal government called Falling Through the Net, a survey of the have-nots in rural and urban America. That was the first in a series of data reports to inform the public about the digital divide over the years. And that pioneering report actually highlighted a lot of differences that were unmistakable in the state of computer ownership and telecommunications access among the members of the American public. Of course, it hinges on a variety of considerations like economics and geographic location and socioethnic factors. But all of those have influenced the amount, the availability, and the quality of information and technology to which any individual or family has access. And over the years, of course, we've had other terms that have evolved to describe, and excuse me, I forgot to turn off the sound on my phone, which is now ringing. I will do that. This is part of the technological challenge. Anyway, no matter what the disparities are that have existed over the years, some are going to continue to persist for the foreseeable future. And of course, we all know that since the start of the pandemic, all of these issues have been highlighted, and even additional new issues have arisen, all contributing to the definition of the digital divide. But the digital divide is a big part of why we all need to be cognizant of digital equity. Angela, please, next slide. So I'm going to start with some definitional pieces. Digital inclusion, and again, many of you may have heard the term, a lot of you probably haven't, but digital inclusion are the activities that are necessary to ensure that everybody actually has access to and is able to use information and communication technology. However, the definition does go on to say, and this is a definition taken from an organization called the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which we'll talk about later. But digital inclusion must evolve as technology advances, and it requires very intentional strategies and investments to reduce and eliminate historical, institutional, and structural barriers to access and use of technology. And again, if we think about the audience that we all address, the adult learners, this is a really critical concept for our adult learners. Digital inclusion, of course, is the path to digital equity, which is what we want to achieve. So for digital inclusion, there are 5 elements that make it up. And Angela, thank you. And those 5 elements, though people always talk about the 3-legged stool of digital equity, digital inclusion, there are actually 5 elements. Affordable, robust broadband internet service. We think about broadband, we think about how people get access to the internet, and we throw around a lot of terminology, but broadband is the underlying method that we use to get to the internet. And then we talk about devices, internet-enabled devices. We talk about those, we talk about making them available and accessible. We have to look at them from the perspective of whether or not those devices meet the needs of the users. And I say that because these days, a lot of people talk about the fact that, quote, everyone, end quote, has access to the internet because many people have smartphones, or at least semi-intelligent phones, if we want to look at it that way. But the fact of the matter is that a phone, while useful, may not be the device that people need to satisfy the needs that they have to access things that are out there on the internet. Access to training, digital literacy training, digital skills training. Again, there are many efforts going on now to distribute devices. There are many efforts to provide people with internet access at low cost, distribute these low cost or no cost devices. But if training is not included with that, the devices become paperweights, and the affordable programs, or allegedly affordable programs, are going to go unused. So we need to make sure that people have access to training and learning opportunities. And then applications and online content, they have to be designed to enable and encourage self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. And they have to be things that are actually useful to people and usable by people. And then finally, the last element of digital inclusion is support. And it's one that people often forget about or overlook, but it's especially important. Again, there are many activities going on now that are distributing devices, and they're getting access to the internet, and they're providing the training, and people go away from the training, sometimes with a free device, and they've got a newly established account so they can go online, and they get home and they plug the machine in and nothing happens. And then what do you do? So just consider how you feel when your device isn't working, or when your connection to the internet isn't working. And then think about how a new user with limited literacy skills begins to sort out those problems. And I've had many conversations with folks about, the fact that there's a lot of us, and I say us because I'm part of a local literacy organization as well. And a lot of us during the pandemic made sure that our students got, access to machines. We did whatever we could to get them trained. We managed to get them hotspots and other ways to get onto the internet. only to find out again that something isn't working and they don't know who to call. And even if they call somebody, even if they've got like a tech support number that came with their internet subscription, they don't know what questions to ask. And the people on the other end of the phone don't communicate in language that they can understand. So we need to keep that in mind as a part of this whole digital equity piece. And I didn't mean to go on about this for a long time, but I really think that this is important. So let's go on to the next thing, and I will actually define digital equity. Um, the digital inclusion movement, and that's a whole nother discussion, but there, again, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, whose web address you're seeing on the screen here, has done a lot of work at defining and identifying what would be needed for digital access to be truly equitable. And this definition is the definition that they've come up with, and I think it's pretty all encompassing. So right now, the major current federal digital equity program, about which we're going to talk more in session 2, is labeled Internet for All, and it echoes the effort to reach digital equity. It's the overall goal that we have so that we can get rid of that thing that I defined as the digital divide. And it gives communities and individuals an entree into full participation in society. But it also is necessary to level the playing field. And again, I'm speaking from the perspective of the students that we serve as adult literacy leaders, who are the ones who have the least opportunity to play on a level field. So next slide, please. And that kind of leads me to this, and I'm sure people are looking at this and going, what? What does this have to do with what she's talking about with digital equity? But actually, aside from the fact that I spent a large chunk of my professional life as a librarian, the slide is an example of why we need digital equity. So for anybody who may be on this call who's less than 40 at least, the quote probably doesn't seem to make much sense because, of course, we know that a lot of people could be reading the same things at the same time anywhere in the world these days, and of course, libraries like the New York Public, which is the one that's featured in the quote, don't really need to and don't have as much physical inventory, like all of those books that you see, as they used to have in the past. But the quote, if you're looking at, just take a look at and the date, The Stand on Zanzibar, John Bruner, 1968. This book was published in 1968, and which is, more than 50 years ago. And it actually preceded the internet as we know it today. Yet it predicted an information environment that we all take for granted, or at least most of us do. And the reason that this is important when we're thinking about digital equity is because although most of us take it for granted, we have to realize that there are many people for whom access to information is not easy, it's not available, it's not affordable, nor is it reliable. And again, many of the students that we serve are in those populations that are suffering from all of those things. Next slide, please. So we all know, we're, again, living in this digital age. Access to information's become essential, especially, through technology. It's a driving force for all sorts of things like education and working and financial management and many of our government and public services or shopping, transportation, health. But as a result, people also need a multitude of skills to engage with this technology. And starting with something as basic as foundational literacy, we know, again, a lack of basic skills cause many of our colleagues, customers, neighbors, students, and others to be left behind in the digital age. So as I mentioned earlier, next slide, please. Adult learners need more than just basic skills and conventional computer skills to engage with life in the 21st century. And digital inclusion, digital equity are the concepts that are going to allow people to embrace the digital world to the fullest. And again, if you think about the things that you see here on the screen, we take a lot of this for granted. If we are skilled, even if we're not highly skilled, but we know how to use basic technology, we take for granted that we can do all of these things. We can participate in all of these things. But again, we've got many, many people who cannot. So I had planned to do a poll, but I'm just going to ask you to think about this for a minute. Like, how many of you who are participating in this call were actually teaching digital literacy skills 5 years ago? Because I'm sure that there were many who probably were not. But think about it. How many of you have been teaching these skills for the past 2 years? You know, and again, I'm almost willing to bet that there are a whole lot of folks here who have had to be doing it for the last few years. And so I would also ask you to think about how many of you were prepared to teach these skills at the start of the pandemic. Think about that too. So we've got a whole new world. And thank you. If you would like to put your answers in the chat, we'd love to find out how many of you, and I'll go back over them again. How many of you were teaching digital literacy 5 years ago? How many of you have been teaching these skills for the past 2 years? And how many of you were prepared to teach these skills at the start of the pandemic? You know, if we think about it again, in this field, the field of adult learning, we really didn't get, as a field, into using the technology until probably, it's probably been at least 5 years, but it was pretty much when the GED went online. A lot of us had to scramble for that. And then when the pandemic came, we had to scramble even harder. But that all leads to my next slide, which is, why are we talking about digital inclusion? You know, we know that there are approximately 43 million adults who read below the grade level. At least that's according to the PIAC data. And more than half of those adults are people of color. And then if you're all familiar with PIAC data, think about the original report. It said that more than 30 million adults didn't have computer skills at the time that they did the last PIAC study. And included in that population were nearly 40% of the adults who had not completed high school. And again, large percentages of cultural and ethnic minorities. Also, at the time of the PIAC reports, the last round, which, you know, they're preparing to do a new round now, but 72% of adults in the US didn't have what they call digital problem solving skills. And that included about 60% of the millennials, whom we always assume have those skills, but we also know are not as technologically competent in the working world as we think they should be. And I don't know how many people, again, PIAC have changed the way they described this, but originally they were talking about problem solving in a technology-rich environment, which meant using technology, communication tools and networks to acquire, evaluate information, communicate with others, and perform practical tasks. So basically digital skills of all sorts, you know, so it's not just about digital literacy, but it's about digital skills broadly defined. these are the things, though, that bolster the ongoing problems of the skills gap, and where we have a difficult time matching people who want to work or are available to work with the jobs that are available for them. So, and I guess I need to move along a little more quickly here. Thank you. So this, again, digital equity, why is it important? Well, as you can see, it's important for pretty much everything. I think we probably want to move on to the context in which our adult learners need to be able to function. We have barriers, we have challenges. I'm sure, again, those of you who are providing training or support are running into some of these issues, especially the relevance and perception and price in terms of the access to the internet and access to devices and so on. There are a lot of issues that people have, like, why do I need to do that? I can't afford it. I don't know how to maintain it. I don't understand what it is. This list doesn't include all the socioeconomic challenges that we have as well, and the things that we face in our organizations in trying to help our students do this. But there are, and if you go to the next slide, please, we do have some opportunities and some solutions. Digital equity and inclusion work is going on in a lot of communities. Again, the adult literacy world, those of us who are in the field, are not always plugged into the activities that are going on with digital equity and inclusion. But many of the organizations that are doing digital equity work are actually doing work that's complementary to what we do with adult literacy. But we're going to talk more about those opportunities in session 2 as we examine digital equity and other activities going on in the digital inclusion community. But collaborators, for example, in terms of opportunities to build new partnerships or build trust or increase awareness, collaborators could include public libraries or state and local government agencies or educational institutions, faith-based entities. But and some of the places where things are going on, a lot of them are major cities, not all major cities. For example, we have a digital equity collaborative in Durham, North Carolina, where I live. There's work going on in Portland, Oregon, and Austin, Texas. Many places, a fairly long list. If you look at the National Digital Inclusion Alliance website, you can see where there are many, many more. But in quite a few cases, like I said, they're addressing all the 5 facets of digital inclusion that I mentioned earlier and working towards digital equity. But I think I'm going to, because I don't want to take up too much time now, I've taken up a lot, but I do want to turn this over to my colleague, Angela, who is going to prepare us to think forward on this topic. So Angela, do you want to take over from here?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Gwen. So Gwen has done an excellent job sort of laying the foundation and providing some context to next week's session 2, which will be basically leveraging digital equity and inclusion for funding. And so the good news is that there is funding coming down the pike. And on this slide here, which actually provides basically a good way to set the stage for the session on Tuesday next week, it provides some things that you should ponder, things that you should think about. We're short on time today, but just think about, jot these questions down if you can, because we're going to be addressing these so that it's personalized towards your needs and how you can basically have a seat at the table as basically the states get access And Gwenn already mentioned, she's going to talk about the Digital Equity Act, which is basically part of that joint infrastructure bill that passed last year. So there's some important legislation there. And we know that you all, in serving the base that you serve of adult learners, that you're doing some things well. You probably have a great story to tell. Hopefully you have an elevator speech that you've already worked on that you can present, but we just want to make sure that you understand how to get a seat at the table, how to position yourself to basically not only participate and access this funding, but be a contributor to help not only the customer base that you serve, but to help your community, your local community thrive. Because we know when adult learners thrive and they have the tools and everything that they need, that makes society better for all of us. We wouldn't have these conversations now about inflation so much if we had a fully productive society, having people who are productive contributing to the GDP in a way that provides a livable wage, that provides high quality jobs. And we know that technology is a pathway to get there in all facets of life. So we're really going to be touching on funding next week. We're going to be looking at, again, the funding sources, targeted populations, and how you can strategically position yourself to have a seat at that table. So we do hope that you will come back on Tuesday because we have a wealth of information to share with you. And again, we just really want you to be successful so that your participants, the audience that you serve is successful, and that your communities can continue to flourish and thrive. And this, yes, digital age, but I'm also hearing now that we're in this exponential age. I'm hearing exponential a lot now, so that should tell us something. When people are now talking about exponential, that technology is accelerating not at the speed or in decades, but basically in years, and in some instances, months, some instances,
weeks.
days. So we want everybody prepared. And so we are at the conclusion. It is now 12:30. We understand that some of you may have to leave, but if some of you can stay, we will allow, since we did start a little late, a few minutes for questions, because we want to make sure that we get your questions in. And I will, while you all are maybe providing questions in the chat, I will just show this last slide in case anyone here wants to contact either Gwenn or myself directly with questions. Thank you all.
Right. Yeah, we thank you for your time. And we will look forward to sharing more information with you next week.
So hello, Gwenn. There was one question in the chat, but I think I
Sure.
managed to answer it, but maybe you can weigh in on this. So the question was, what do you mean by digital problem solving? Using the technology to solve a problem, or what to do when a computer doesn't work? And I found on nces.ed.gov a statement saying digital problem solving is the ability to access and interpret information in digital environments to perform practical tasks. But do you want to say anything else about that?
Well, that is the formal definition that's based on the PIAC again. As I said, they used to call it problem solving in a technology-rich environment, and they've changed the wording to digital problem solving. However, the question's a good one because it is, as I was talking about earlier, that you have to use technology for so many things these days that it's beyond just being able to being able to use the machine, but it is really how do you also take advantage of the technology to solve problems, to address issues, to create things. The technology, creating content now has become a big piece as well. So I would say, even though that definition is focused on a specific part of digital problem solving, I believe the other part of the question was like, how do you, if the computer's not working, what do you do? That's part of what I was talking about with the support issue. Frequently people don't know what to do. And so part of digital problem solving is also helping people get to the point where they know how to ask the right questions when they're looking for help. That is a big problem. And yes, I see someone is saying that too. No familiarity with a keyboard or computer. And particularly when people have been only using a phone. Keyboard skills are rare these days. That's one of the things we keep running into, but they're necessary. So again, as adult educators, we have a lot of work to do, but that's part of why I do want to talk more about collaborations and partnerships when we speak again, because, and I say this to I cross from adult literacy, the adult literacy world, into the library world, into the digital equity world, and back again. And I say this in each of my groups, in each of my activity groups, that you don't have to go it alone. So there are people doing various parts of this work in different subject matter areas. And it's worth it to find out who else is doing similar work and where can you share the burdens, where can you share the load. So there may be, for example, someone who's running a computer training program or digital literacy program that is actually teaching keyboarding skills. And so it might be possible to make sure that your students can find a place where they can learn keyboarding skills so that you don't have to spend time doing that. You can spend your time teaching them something at the next level or the next step.
Well, I want to thank you, Gwenn Weaver and
You're
Angela
welcome.
Harris, our hosts. No other questions have come in, but Janet did mention that she appreciates the timing where they are. They have a new, they're underway with developing a new digital skills program, and I don't think they're alone. I think
Right.
I think there are a lot of people in that boat. So please join us again next Tuesday, the 15th, next Thursday, the